The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "Be watchful, be alert. You do not know when the time will come. It is like a man traveling abroad. He leaves home and places his servants in charge, each with his own work, and orders the gatekeeper to be on the watch. Watch, therefore. You do not know when the Lord of the house is coming, whether in the evening or at midnight or at cockcrow or in the morning. May he not come suddenly and find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to all, watch." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So we hear Jesus tell us to be watchful and to be alert. I spent 3 years down at St. Meinrad at the college seminary there. And 1 year we decided we were going to go on the March for Life. So we had classes all day. And then after dinner we loaded the bus and headed toward Washington, D.C. I think it was about a 12 or 13-hour drive. I didn't sleep a wink on the way there. Just when I was starting to fall asleep, a big pink fireball appeared in my eyes. The sun was coming up, so didn't get any sleep. We got to Washington, D.C., and we got there a day before the march, so of course we had to take in the sights. So we were going through the various Smithsonian institutes and things like that, and I think it was somewhere in the National Museum of Art where I started falling asleep standing up. I was not alert. I was not awake. But maybe Jesus is talking about something a little different here. In this gospel story Jesus tells today, he says that the master of the house goes away and leaves each of his servants, and they each have their own work to do. And I think that's significant. We each are called to something different. What Jesus calls me to will be something different than what he calls you to, perhaps. But we all have things to do, and that's what this period of Advent is all about, preparing ourselves for the future coming of Jesus. St. Bernard of Clairvaux said there really has been 3 comings of Jesus. One when he came in the flesh and was born in Bethlehem. That's one coming of Jesus that we wait for. Another is Jesus coming to each of us in our lives, in our hearts. And he comes to us through the reading of the Gospel or through the receiving of the Eucharist. So Jesus is with us always, day in and day out. Jesus reminded us before he went up to heaven, "I will be with you always until the end of time." But then there's that third coming of Jesus that we await, that his final coming in glory at the end of the earth, when the earth will pass away and there'll be a new earth and a new heaven. So, even though Jesus has already conquered through his death and resurrection, he's conquered death, we still have evil to deal with in our world. And we've experienced some of that great evil in the past week with the situation with Janet's granddaughters, Mallory and Meredith. I've been reading this book from Matthew Kelly, Perfectly Yourself, and Friday I was getting toward the end and I read this and I thought, how appropriate. So if you bear with me, I'd like to read a couple lines. He says, "There are events that appear to be complete manifestations of hatred and evil. These situations are often diabolical and devoid of good. We shouldn't pretend otherwise. When evil visits our lives or the lives of the people we love and care about, there is no benefit to anyone in the mistaken notion that it happened for a good reason. Good things may come from these horrible situations, but that will only be because good people will restore hope and love to the lives of those who have been harmed by evil. We should avoid the temptation to sugarcoat the reality of evil when we come face to face with it. Fortunately, for most of us, we rarely, if ever, face a situation of this magnitude. Certainly, Janet and her family have faced this situation. At the funeral yesterday, Father Todd Reeby was the homilist, and he talked about that. And he talked about Carmela's 2-year-old daughter. Mallory's 2-year-old daughter, Carmela Rose. And Father Todd asked, what kind of world do we want to make? What kind of world do we want to leave to Carmela Rose? We can't allow bad things, awful things, to be the last thing that she remembers. And that's what Jesus is calling us to. We're called to make the world better. We heard last week the final judgment. And so what are we supposed to be doing? We're supposed to be feeding the hungry and giving drink to the thirsty and clothing the naked and caring for the sick and visiting the imprisoned and welcoming the stranger and giving housing to those who are homeless. So Jesus told us last week that's how we're going to be judged. So those are the things that we should be spending our time on. And so I'd like to ask you, especially during this season of Advent, but beyond that, hopefully, what's one thing you could take on? What's one thing? What's one small thing you could do? Maybe it would be to visit someone who needs a visit. Someone who's grieving. Someone who's lonely. Maybe someone in a nursing home. Maybe not a direct relative, but maybe someone you know who would enjoy seeing you. Matthew Kelly asked, who is someone that you can bring joy to? Whose day can you make? Can you get up first thing in the morning and say, whose day can I make today? And how can I do that? These are all good things for us to be asking during this period of Advent, this period of waiting for our redemption, our Savior to come, born as a babe in Bethlehem. Many years ago, when I was quite young, I remember there was an advertisement for the Ford motor car company. And it was a little jingle. And the woman sung, "Have you driven a Ford?" And she just kind of lets that hang out there and linger, and you hear some music in the background. And she repeats it, "Have you driven a Ford?" And then finally she says, "Lately." So the whole purpose of this advertisement was to get you to think that maybe Ford cars, trucks, are different than they were earlier. Maybe you had had one before and not really cared for it, but look at what we're doing now. I was at the post office a couple weeks ago down here in Edinburgh, and I don't mean to pick on the post office. But I was waiting for a package. She went to get a package for me, and I was looking around. Oh, I looked up there above the window, and there's some certificates up there. And they're for a great percentage of on-time and accurate delivering of packages and letters and things like that. Then I looked at the dates, 2002. And so when the lady brought me my package, I said, well, what have you done lately? So I don't know if their performance has gone down, or maybe the post office has just quit handing out certificates. But I was like, well, it's 2017 now. Let's get going here. So I was giving her a little grief over that. But we can't rest on our laurels. St. Augustine said that we're always moving. We're either moving toward virtue or we're moving toward vice. Okay? The things that we do, the acts that we do, they're either virtuous acts or they're acts of vice. So we need to be moving toward the virtuous. And Advent is a wonderful time to remember that, and to remember that we need to be moving toward that great second coming of Jesus Christ, that which will lead us to everlasting life with Him. So let's be watchful, let's be alert, and let's think of one small thing we can do during this Advent season to make someone's day, or to help someone, to give them joy in their life. And let's do that then.